Hurry up, Jerry. Hurry up, my friend. Yeah. When you said, when you said. Good morning and welcome to our October meeting of the Budget Review Subcommittee on General Government, Personnel, and Public Retirement. Before we get to roll call, I just want to remind those members that as you announce your presence, please let us know where you're at. And with that, I will ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Senator Mills.
I'm here remotely at my office.
In your annex office, sir?
In the district. I'm
District. Okay, thank you. Senator Southworth.
Here in the room.
Senator Thomas. Senator West. Representative Bratcher. Representative Donahue.
Yes, ma'am. Present.
Representative Graham.
Here.
Representative Hart.
Here in the room.
Representative Koenig.
Here in the room.
Representative Meredith.
Participating remotely from the district.
Thank you. Representative Miles.
Participating remotely from my district.
Thank you. Representative Pratt. Representative Raymond. Representative Tate.
Here in the room.
Representative Wheatley.
Here in the room.
Senator McDaniel. Representative Petrie. Representative Reed. Thank you. Representative Gooch.
Here in the room.
Representative Miller.
Here in the room.
Co-Chair Nemus.
Present in the room.
Co-Chair Blanton. Chair Dossett.
Present in the room. Thank you. Next, we'll move on to approval for September's minutes. Can I get a motion? And a second? Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Minutes pass. Now we'll move on to our presentation. First, we're honored to have our first guest come before. We'll ask the Secretary of State, Mike Adams, to please come forward. And I think you have someone with you right there. Thank you for being here. I'll ask you both to introduce yourself and go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Here at the table with me, I've got my Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Jennifer Scutchfield. And just behind us, we have Michael Wilson. He's the Director of our Office of Business Services. Well, good morning. It's good to be back with you all. I'm here to discuss my office's budget request. But first, I want to thank you again for your passage of House Bill 574 in this year's regular session. You've made Kentucky the envy of our country in election administration. And now, as we've modernized our election process, it's time to modernize our business filings process as well. Like most of you, I'm a fiscal conservative. In each new budget year since I was sworn in, my office has not taken general fund appropriations. Indeed, at the request of Governor Beshear early in the pandemic, I returned a portion of general fund appropriations our office previously had been allocated for fiscal year 2020 in order to assist him in balancing the state budget. Our office's budget is the smallest of any Kentucky constitutional officer, and our general fund appropriations are zero. In a typical fiscal year, we generate about $8 million, spend about $5 million, hold about $1 million, and then transfer about $2 million to the general fund at your direction. Considering all the services that we provide for both elections and businesses, all while generating a surplus, I'd say we're the best deal in town. The services we offer Kentuckians are fully paid for by our office's customers, the businesses that file with us and pay a small fee. It costs $15 a year for a business to file with us, the lowest fee in the country. Even so, we generate sufficient revenue for the General Assembly to dig into our trust fund and transfer millions of surplus dollars to the general fund each fiscal year. I'm not here today to ask you for any tax dollars, nor am I here to ask you to raise any fees. My request is modest. Just allow us to keep a little more of our own revenue and reinvest it into improving the customer experience for our business filers. We ask that you sweep only $1 million out of our trust fund each of the next 2 fiscal years and authorize us to spend another $1 million in each of those 2 years. For 3 reasons. First, we need to make upgrades to our IT system to ensure our election and business service systems remain secure and reliable. We also need to pay senior-level staff members to maintain these systems. Together, these hardware, software, and staffing costs would consume nearly all of the additional $1 million annually that we're requesting, but this need is critical. Second, beyond the issue of security is the issue of functionality. The Beshear administration has served our office notice that the Revenue Department will not be a full partner with the Secretary of State in operating the One-Stop Business Portal once they implement their own $100 million upgrade. Consequently, we want to create the ability for businesses to form on the Secretary of State's website, but we lack the ability to do so on our current system. And third, demand for the services of our office has increased significantly. The number of LLCs registered in the Commonwealth has doubled in the last 4 years and has even increased during the pandemic. While we're happy to see more entrepreneurs starting businesses in Kentucky, the increase in filings has led to an increase in questions on technical issues. Yet our customer service staff has not grown. This can lead to frustrations when Kentuckians try to navigate our system. We want to make it as easy as possible to open and operate a business in Kentucky. Again, I am not asking the General Assembly to allocate us any taxpayer money. I merely request that you take away less of our revenue that we generate by serving our customers so that we can better serve our customers. While other constitutional officers have seen funding increases, our office continues to do more with less. Like you, I'm ecstatic about the recent announcement of Ford Motor Company's plans for Glendale, but let's not neglect the small business people who create most of the new jobs in our state. We can do more to help them at very little expense and at no cost at all to the taxpayers. Thanks, and I welcome your questions.
Do we have any questions for the Secretary of State? Ms. Secretary, I want to thank you for the service of what you've done. And we will be happy to take a look at this. Are there any specific changes that you'd like to share with us of any additional staff you're needing to add on, or would you like to share any of that with us of what you'd like to, some changes you would like to make there in the office?
Yes, thank you. A couple things. Number one, on the staffing side, I think we could add as few as about 4 people. 3 on the IT side and 1 on the customer service side for our business filers. That would take a big load off of our staff. It's not cheap to hire the IT people. They're professionals. Those would not be state employees. Those would be contracts. But we think we can check off both the first and the second request with the same people if we had about 3 of those. Our office has actually shrunk significantly over time. We do a lot more with computers, a lot more through automated services, and so we've significantly shrunk the staff historically. But we have a lot of turnover because the stress is high and people are working really hard. I think if we had just 1 more person in our business office, that would really help. Again, this is a small office. I think that we could really improve our business environment with just 3 or 4 people.
Senator Nemes?
Yes, thank you for being here and thank you for your service. But while we have you here, I thought I'd ask you to expand on the voter ID, on what the implementation of it, the cost of it, and anything you'd like to discuss on it.
In terms of effectiveness, I think it speaks for itself that we had a successful election last year, and specifically as to voter ID. In this line of work, there's a lot of chicken littles. There's a lot of people that think the sky's going to fall on everything that we do, and it turns out to not be true. We all remember the All Eyes on Kentucky thing in the spring of last year. The bottom line is we were, to my knowledge, the only state in America to implement photo ID to vote during a pandemic. That certainly took some courage on your part and ours, but we did that successfully. And despite the predictions, there was not mass disenfranchisement. 99% of voters plus last year voted with a photo ID. We implemented photo ID both for absentee voters, which is highly unusual, but we did that. We also implemented, of course, for in-person voters. There was a tiny, tiny subset of people who had to use the bypass within that law that we included to make sure that it was constitutional and would not be struck down by a court. We had fewer than 2,000 voters who voted through personal recognizance. That is to say, the poll worker recognized the person and they didn't need to get a photo ID to verify their identity. We're talking about fewer than 2,000 people out of 2 million voters last fall. And there was even a smaller number of people who voted through the reasonable impediment prong of the law. People who can't get a photo ID, religious objections, what have you, had other ways to verify their identity. Fewer than 1,000 of those voters. Again, that's out of over 2 million voters, the highest turnout in our history. So 99% plus of voters voted with a photo ID. I'm the first person to hear if someone has a problem. It's all over Twitter or our phones light up. We didn't have a single constituent complaint about anyone being denied access to the ballot.
Thank you. Appreciate the success and also the expungement of voter rolls too. So.
Thank you.
Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My comment is really addressed to the committee. I would agree with Secretary Adams that he does need another person to business filings. He's indicated that his filings of LLCs have doubled in the past year. I'm probably responsible for some of that myself because
Thanks for your business.
I do a lot of business corporate work, so I would definitely agree because I'm in his office at least once, this is not twice a month, filing some paperwork. He definitely needs one more customer service person in that business filing area. I will tell you that personally.
Thank you.
Representative Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate you coming before us today, and I appreciate you working with the governor in many ways to make sure that we've always had, as far as I know, a good system in place of people voting. And you talked about only 2,000 people were allowed to vote who the precinct worker knew. So you keep that statistic. Do you keep a statistic as to how many people were turned away because they didn't have the proper ID, or the person who was working the precinct did not know them? Do we keep those statistics as well?
Well, could I address that with a little bit of background from the law, if I could? So there's sort of a tiered system in this statute. The default is that people vote with a photo ID. If they are unable to do that, there are bypasses. One is if the poll worker knows the individual. We've had personal recognizance as a bypass in our law since before we even had photo ID. But the problem with that was that we didn't have any sort of metric, any sort of way of actually verifying if the poll worker really knew that person or not. We had some evidence of abuse of that, people just kind of being waved in. And so something that Senate Bill 2 in 2020 did was it said, all right, well, the poll worker can let in the voter, but the poll worker needs to execute a document just for our records in case we have evidence of someone letting in people inappropriately. So that's the reason that's documented. In previous elections, there was no documentation. There was no number. That's why we have a number for that. Again, that's fewer than 2,000 voters out of over 2 million. Next is the reasonable impediment prong. This is something that I borrowed from the state of South Carolina as we were putting together the bill. I didn't want a draconian law that would actually have the impact of disenfranchising anybody. I wanted a humane law. I wanted a law that would be upheld by the courts upon challenge, as this one was. The reasonable impediment prong says it might be because of your religious objection or various reasons you can't get a photo ID. That's okay. You can vote with one of certain approved non-photo IDs. Again, on that, there were fewer than 1,000 voters out of over 2 million that needed that option. And then finally, there's a provision in federal law which supersedes all of this, the provisional ballot. Maybe you've had a really bad day. Maybe you don't have a photo ID. Maybe you don't have a non-photo ID. Maybe the poll worker doesn't know you. If all of those things are true, you can still vote in this election, but you have to vote by provisional ballot. And that goes into a separate bin. And then you're entitled by law to due process. You're entitled to a hearing in front of the County Board of Elections to find some other method to verify your identity for that vote to be counted. And typically, we have, literally just hundreds, if that, cast in a statewide election of millions of voters. So the short answer is no. I don't have any metrics on people being turned away, but it's not clear to me how anyone would be turned away. They can vote by provisional ballot if they don't meet any of the other prongs of our statute. So there's no rationale for anyone being turned away. I will add this. I have seen people turned away from the polls in my 20 years practicing law as an election lawyer specifically. I've seen it lots. And the number one way I've seen people turned away is they go to vote at the wrong precinct. We fixed that with our vote center model. We did that in 2020. We allowed a voter to vote at any of the county locations. And then we put that in our bill in 574 to make that an option permanently for counties to adopt. So you don't have to vote at your precinct. You don't even have to know your precinct. Regular people don't know their precinct. I think this is one of the reasons that we helped increase the turnout. So I think the best way to combat people being turned away inappropriately is, number one, make sure they have a bypass to prove their identity, but also, number two, to let them vote at any location in the county.
And you talked about, and I may follow up with that in a minute, but I want to get to this because I may not be able to ask the question. You were talking about you needed 3 people for IT, and you needed 1 more individual for which position did you say? Business services. That's what I thought. Customer service is what I wrote down. So with those 4 additional employees, how many overall do you have within your office?
That's kind of a moving target because we have so much turnover right now. I'm authorized for 32. I think we have 30 seats as of today that are full. So we'd be looking at a max of about 36.
Okay. Right.
We had 50 10 years ago.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Wheatley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary, and it's a pleasure to see you again. We've had a few discussions, and your request is very modest today. I think we can hopefully have some reasonable discussions about that. But I also want to talk a little bit about 574, House Bill 574, and was a pleasure to be part of some of those discussions before the bill got to the floor. And as you and I have had some other discussions since then, there's some advances that we'd like to see more of. Some we certainly want to have the input of the county clerks and the State Board of Elections, and I hope that we continue to do that and move better access to the polls in a positive way. And I know that's been part of what you've talked about since your time as Secretary of State. Really appreciate that. The Senator brought up a part of 574 that doesn't get talked about a lot, and that is in relationship to removing people from the poll or from the voter rolls. And we know we've had an issue in Kentucky for many, many years, and there's been challenges to do that, not only Kentucky but other states. So the system or the language that went into 574 related to that makes it a little easier to, from notification from other states, that they will be able to remove people from the rolls under certain conditions. Can you talk a little bit about, and maybe the deputy can help also with this, about the numbers that we typically would have removed by this time to the numbers that have happened since House Bill 574 has gone into effect?
Well, thank you for that question. I think it's appropriate for our elections to be as transparent as they possibly can, and so we're the first Secretary's office to put out regular updates every month. So you can check our math. You can see the basis for, well, number one, who came off, and the basis for why they came off, how many dead voters, how many felons, how many mentally incompetent, and so forth. So we put that out the last Friday of the month every single month, and you can see all of those numbers. We have had some voters removed under this prong. It's not been a massive number. Basically, I asked for this language because every month or so I'll get a letter from the Secretary of State of Montana or New York or whoever, and they'll say, "Dear Secretary Adams, here's a list of all these people that are now residents of our state and registered to vote, but we checked and they're on your rolls too." But I couldn't do anything about it by law, just because of a loophole in the law. And to your great credit, nearly all of you voted to give me that authority to actually do my job and take those people off. The vast majority of the folks that have been removed in the last 21 months have been deceased. But most of the ones who are left are still alive. They are people who have moved to other states, who may or may not have didn't notify us, didn't take steps to come off the rolls. They assume, not unreasonably, that, well, the governments all talk to each other. Well, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. There's about 30 of the states that belong to Interstate Compact where we actually do cross-check, but there's a lot of states, of course, that don't belong to that. So you're not going to see an earth-shattering number come off at one time until after the 2022 election. That's because of the National Voter Registration Act of 1993. It requires the states to undertake reasonable maintenance efforts. That's the law that our office, prior to my term, was found to have not complied with in getting the rolls cleaned up. Under that federal law, we can't just sweep people off. We have to send them a notice. We have to wait and see if they vote. And then if they don't, then we have to send them a notice and we have to see if they vote, and then they don't. So by law, it takes 2 federal general election cycles before you can remove those people without their consent, unless there's some other thing that happens. Well, if they die, you can take them off. If they're judged incompetent, you can take them off. If they convicted of a felony, you can take them off. If another state notifies us of dual registration, we can take them off. Sometimes those things don't happen. Sometimes people just don't meet any of those criteria. By federal law, I cannot take them off until 2 federal general cycles pass. And so as soon as we got here, we did the first notification, and then the second notification will go out. And so after the 2022 general election, I'll be able to do a lot more on this. But until then, I can't do the sort of 6-figure number that people are looking at.
All right, thank you. If I can just quick follow up. Sure, go ahead.
I was just going to add, under when we joined ERIC, and I guess it was 2019 that officially we joined, we would get the death notices from the state of Kentucky. Mm-hmm. But if someone died outside of Kentucky but were registered to vote in Kentucky, we could not guarantee that we would get that notice. We are now getting the death index from the U.S., the, I guess, master index. And so last month you saw a large amount of dead voters being removed, and that is because of that matching.
Okay, thank you. Just quick follow-up.
Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the number I was looking for, and I know you probably would have to go back and check the data, was typically how many people would have been removed under all the criteria that would exist before House Bill 574 went into effect, as opposed to what the difference has made. And I know we talked about the challenges, the notifications that are necessary, the federal law that's necessary. Just if the cross-check method has had much of a difference. That's the kind of information I was looking for, and we can maybe talk a little bit more offline.
It's in the hundreds. It's in the hundreds a month. It's not in the tens of thousands. It's in the hundreds.
Okay,
a month.
Okay, and thank you for that. And
I'm kind of at the mercy of other states and what they send me.
Exactly, but and they have to participate. They'd have to be one of the 30 states that participate. And legal challenges related to cross-check, is anything going on that? Oh.
No, we're not aware of any intent to sue over it. There's really, as far as I'm concerned, there's really no interest in anyone wanting people on the rolls who shouldn't be there. I don't think that it benefits either party, and neither party has an incentive, I think, to try to challenge that. I think everyone wants accurate government records. Mm-hmm.
And I think, Mr. Secretary, as you mentioned, being at the mercy of other states, I know within my district, there in Christian County with Fort Campbell, we have the issue with military personnel registering to vote, but transferring out every 2 years. And when you're looking at that database, and I have looked at it over the last 20 years running for office because that would be within my district. I see those numbers, and when you go looking for those individuals, they're not living there in the community. So, and then you'll see multiple names attached to the same address.
I know this is a great point of frustration for Christian County. They always have the lowest turnout in the state, and it's not their fault.
Correct.
It's because they've got this major military base, and a lot of folks register there, and then they don't have an interest in local elections, and they don't vote. They might vote for president once every 4 years. I wish I had a good answer for that. You know, something that local leadership has raised with me is the possibility of legislation to make Fort Campbell a separate precinct that is not part of Christian County.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we can do that. It's something that we're looking at.
Okay, thank you. Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, when I asked my first question, I was trying to stay within the agenda and the Secretary's request, but he's gotten a lot of voting questions, and so I would like to ask a few myself, because to be frank with you, a couple of things, Mr. Secretary. Obviously, the big issue facing America today is that our democracy is being challenged. There are a lot of fears and concerns about whether America will continue to be a democratic nation. And secondly, what we've seen in this current political environment is that now your office, as Secretary of State, has become the second most important office in the state. It used to be the Attorney General after the governor, but now the Secretary of State's office has gotten a lot of heightened attention and a heightened awareness, and has become a key political office in this country. And so that's where you sit today. So I have a few, since we're talking about voting, I have a few questions I want to ask you in relation to voting, if I may. Okay. Second, I want to go back to a question raised by my dear friend, Representative Graham, and ask this question, because I think this is, based upon your answer, I think this is the question that needs to be asked. First of all, how many provisional ballots were denied? That's my first question. Secondly, what was our voter turnout in 2020? And what would be the ideal voter turnout? I mean, obviously 100% would be that, but if we got, would it be 80%, 75%? What would be the ideal voter turnout in our state? And then thirdly, special elections. We've got 3 special elections coming up in less than 4 weeks now. Are all of these special elections going to be just precinct elections? Is early voting going to be allowed in these special elections? And are there going to be voting centers in these special elections? I'd like to know that question. So those are 3 questions I have to ask you.
Okay, let me take those in reverse order. So first, there are 3 special elections called by the governor for November 2nd. Those are to fill the 51st House District seat, the 89th House District seat, and the 22nd district in the Senate. That's roughly 10 or 12 counties that are impacted, either the whole county or some precincts in the county. All of those counties are doing vote centers. This is actually, obviously, I regret the fact that we have to have these elections because of resignations and unfortunate passings of legislators. The silver lining is now we get a chance to actually implement this law in 2021 and watch it work before you all come back in January and potentially tweak it. But back to your question, all of these jurisdictions, all of these counties are doing vote centers. What was your other question on that?
Early voting.
Oh, yes, they're all doing early voting as well. They're all doing October 28th through 30th. That's Thursday, Friday, Saturday before November 2nd. So 4 days of voting in all of these jurisdictions.
October 28th through, is that October 20th through 31st through the 31st?
No, so the 31st is a Sunday. They're closed on Sunday.
So it's November 1st.
November 1st is a Monday. They're closed on Monday.
So it's October 27th through 30th?
So the 28th is a Thursday,
right?
Friday and Saturday.
You said 4 days. That's why I was
4 days of voting, yeah. 3 early days and one regular day. So the Thursday through Saturday and then the Tuesday. Okay. We actually, y'all looked at doing the Monday, but the clerks want Monday to close down and get ready for Tuesday. So November 1st will not be an election day. It'll be that Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then Tuesday.
Okay. going backwards then, what was the voter turnout in 2020, and what's the ideal voter turnout for this state? What's the highest we've ever had?
Well, it's kind of a subjective question, what the ideal voter turnout is. I mean, there's not really a clear answer to a question like that. I think the record that we hit was maybe 66%. I don't recall what election that was. Decades ago, obviously. In 2020, our turnout in the primary was 29%. In November, our election was 60%. If you look on the State Board of Elections website, though, they actually have a separate version of calculating the turnout. One version of the turnout is the actual turnout. The other turnout is if you take off if you remove for purposes of analysis the voters that are scheduled for removal. If you do that, the turnout jumps from about 60 to about 65%. So actually, we got pretty close to the record if you neglect the voters who are scheduled to be purged at the end of the year, next year. That answer your question?
That does. And then going back to the question that Representative Graham raised, how many provisional ballots were denied?
I don't have that information. That's something that the county boards of elections do. I can certainly ask for that and get it to you, but I don't have it at the top of my head.
Would you like that, Derek?
Yeah, I want to.
Representative Graham.
I just want to follow up. I was going to ask, is the voter ever told that their ballot has been denied in a provisional ballot? Or do they have to go and seek it out to see if that ballot was counted?
Well, they're entitled to a hearing, so they're going to find out at the hearing.
So how long does it take before, and I should probably know this, but I'm not a lawyer, so I'm asking a question that a lot of people go watching. How long does it take before the decision is made whether or not to count the provisional ballot or not to count it?
Well, generally, the Board of Elections is in session all day on Election Day, and they just roll through them.
Roll through them?
Yeah, so it's
through
immediate.
the course of the day,
That's
not
right.
at the end of the election.
That's right.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you coming and
Of course.
most important thing that we are as citizens is having that right to vote, because you are making a decision about not only of the country right now, but its future. And if you take that away from people, then we're really not a true democratic system of government. So I applaud you for working with the governor. I don't agree with some of the things that we've done, but you all have worked in a bipartisan way.
Well, thank you. I've worked with him, and I've also worked with all of you. And I think what we've gotten right here that hasn't been the case in some other places nationally or in Congress has been we did it that way. And that's important because it gets you a better product. It also gets you a better look, and it means you don't have half the electorate distrusting you because I think you're trying to rig the rules to favor your party. So I think we did it the right way.
Representative Gooch.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary. I think that the work that you've done has been very important, and I think that the results are pretty obvious. And it's some of the things that we did last year during the pandemic in the primary. I don't think. I personally wasn't in favor of a lot of those things, but ultimately it seems to have worked out okay. But I know that often people don't talk about people being disenfranchised and not having the right to vote or whatever, being denied the right to vote. But I can tell you that any time an ineligible voter votes, they're disenfranchising all of us, because somebody is canceling my vote or your vote because they were not really qualified to vote, and we seem to miss that too often. That's also a disenfranchisement of our entire system. And one of the things that has to happen is the American people have to feel like that, or they won't vote. They have to feel like that the process is fair. And I think, not in Kentucky, I think we had a very fair election here, but I'm one of the people that really do not feel that the 2020 general election was fair. There was disenfranchisement of a lot of people's voters because many people we know which states they were, but they were allowed to vote and cancel legitimate votes, and that's something we cannot allow if we want the citizens of this country to feel like that our elections are fair and that we do in fact have a democracy, and we can't have it if we do not have that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Representative Graham?
I have a question, but I'm going to respond to that. So if we don't have fair elections, are you saying that they're not fair at the top of the ticket or at the bottom of the ticket? Because you can't have one election and say for Congress and for the State House and say all those victories are legitimate. But we get to the top of the ticket and we're not thinking that that election was legitimate. You can't have it either way. Either it's a fair election or it's not a fair election. And I find it bothers me because if you look at the states where they say that they were not fair elections, it's where it's a heavy minority population who have voted. That's the fact of the matter. If you look at every one of those states who have been questioned, it's because they have a high degree of minority voters. That says a lot. That says a lot. Everyone is entitled to vote. And whether you don't vote or not, it is your right to decide. And so in some elections, some people decide the election is more important than ever before, and they turn out to vote. And in other elections, people are complacent and don't feel like to vote in voting. Then some people still believe that it doesn't matter whether they vote or not. We obviously in this room all believe that it does matter. But I find it very troubling when people question the state's responsibilities in carrying out their voting process and then say that it was illegally done or illegally counted when the votes were tabulated. So I had to make that statement because if you look at those states, you can see where it's coming from, where you are challenging the right to vote. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Could I respond?
Representative Gage.
And because I feel like that was almost a question to me or whatever. And I'm kind of find it offensive that any time you question the results in a state or a city, that somehow somebody's got to play the race card because that has nothing to do with it. But I do feel like that there are some things that have been said, and if not, the American people need to be told. In certain instances, we were told that a state sent out X number of absentee ballots, but in fact, more people voted absentee than the number of ballots that were sent out. Now, obviously, if that happened, there's a problem there. If that did not happen, then we need to be told that. And I think there are plenty of examples that of things that we have heard. And I don't think it was all social media. I don't think it was all, some of those types of situations. But, we need to find out if those types of things did happen. Were there situations where a huge number of people voted in only the presidential election and didn't vote in other elections? Is that in fact true? I know we're not talking about Kentucky, so obviously you probably don't know. But I'm saying that the best thing that could happen would be that if some of the things that some of us feel and some of the things that we say are not true, then I would love to hear it and show that those things were in fact not true. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We're going to go on with this right here. For my part, to close this out, Mr. Secretary, I know personally what we see our own voting precincts, and I want to compliment the poll workers there within my district for the work that they do. I have a precinct which I vote. We may have 500 votes, 450 is total comes through. And the poll worker who worked there in November of last year, who was my former Sunday school teacher, and I've known my entire life, ID'd me, and we watched the process, and it moves smoothly. So, as I said, I want to end this. Thank you for your presentation. We will be happy to look at what you're requesting there as we start the budget process. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next guest will be from the Commission of Human Rights. We have Terrence Sullivan, who's the Executive Director. I'd like to ask him to come to the table, and please make sure your microphone is on and introduce yourself.
Good morning. I'm Terrence Sullivan, the Executive Director of the Kentucky Commission on Human Rights. And first off, thank you for allowing me to speak this morning. I will start with, I have good news and bad news. My bad news is, unfortunately, I'm not like the Secretary. I will be asking for money, so just putting that out there up front. But also okay, thank you. The good news is I also have pictures, so you don't have to look at me the entire time. So a brief overview just for some people who are unfamiliar with the agency. As I've learned, as I've been in this role, that has been something that I've run into quite a bit. But the agency was created to have the exclusive authority of enforcement of Kentucky Civil Rights Act. And we do that through you all, through 344 and KRS. And we also are able to execute federal policy on civil rights protections as well, as long as they are in line with the Civil Rights Act and under the authority of judicial opinions and other legislative acts that follow some of our federal agreements that are similar to our Civil Rights Act. In Kentucky, we are able to protect people in the areas of housing, employment, public accommodations like going to a store and being denied service, those types of things, or credit transactions, which generally go over to public accommodations. But anyone who's trying to obtain credit or do something on credit and they are discriminated against in that way based on being part of these protected classes that we have in Kentucky, that would be race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability, and then in employment, age 40 and over. I think 40 is a little young, but whatever. And familial status and smoking status. Kentucky has some of the fewest protected classes right now. We have these 8 or so, and some states have 37. But this is where we are. But these are the protected classes in Kentucky, which some of them are expanded based on some federal decisions and opinions that have come out. Just giving you a quick overview of some of the work that we do. The bulk of our cases that we see and prosecute are employment actions. That's 74% generally of what we see is in employment. That is normally someone who's terminated or lack of accommodation for a disability. A lot of times chairs, just things that would help with someone being able to do their job. And then retaliation for oftentimes people who have requested a service for an accommodation or reporting, had a few the other day for reporting racial incidents in the workplace, and then that employee was terminated. Looking back at last year, we had quite a few cases that went through the process, and most of those cases were based on racial discrimination. And I point that out because in the years prior to about 4 or 5 years ago, we saw a shift in the types of complaints that we were seeing. Disability, as I was saying earlier, and employment and lack of accommodations were a large portion of what we saw. And then about 3 years ago, roughly, race and racial discrimination really went up exponentially. And most of our cases have now been based on racial discrimination, which has sprinted past disability. And then our third case or average is based on age. So talking about the things that we do, it's important to just give you an overview of some of the issues that we face. And our biggest issues are payroll, our retirement contributions, the lack of staffing because of those costs, and the appropriations that we have as an agency being well below what is needed for the effective functioning of our agency. And that has created a comprehensive problem, which also leads to us being in jeopardy very soon of losing our federal funding as well, because of their, and I'll address this in a moment, they are very concerned about our lack of staffing because it then makes us ineffective in helping assist their agencies in their work. So looking at our payroll and retirement contributions, 88% of our budget goes to payroll expenses. And our agency is located in downtown Louisville. We have an office in Covington as well, but the rest of our budget basically goes to paying for our lease and utilities. And so we have a very small amount for actual operational expenses because we have 88% going to payroll. And looking across the executive branch, the overall payroll expenses of the executive branch was 21%, but our agency is at 88. And since 2008, a year that anyone who has worked in state government and retirement systems knows about 2008 and the years following, our retirement costs have gone up 900%, while our budget has gone down about 8%, which those numbers, when you add them together, I did not do math. I went to law school because of it, and that's just not good numbers. So what that leaves us with is an issue. Every year, based on our appropriations, we are able to fund fewer positions. The secretary was talking about how they went from 50 to roughly 30. We have gone from the height of having 65 employees to a very sustainable 34. The last time someone really presented to you all about our budget, and now we're down to 18. And that is mostly due to our inability to hire. Our actual offices that we are allowed to hire for also decreases every so often just because of that lack of funding. And so what that leaves us with is a failure to meet some of our statutory requirements. An example is we're supposed to find probable cause in a case that comes in within 30 days of that case being filed. That's in 344, that's the law. The average PC or probable cause determination that we have comes in at about day 98. We also have a 180-day statutory requirement for closure. Our current average is around a year, which is, again, I'm not the best at math, but that's a lot longer than 180 days. So I'll go back for a second. Where that kind of comes from, and this is just for explaining some of that delay, is at one point we had 15, 20 investigators because we cover the entire state of Kentucky. We currently have 3 full-time investigators and 3.5 if you count their supervisor. And that's about one investigator for 1.1 million Kentuckians. And that, again, those numbers don't seem to make sense, but that's a That's the most of the investigators we have right now. And again, they are asked to investigate cases for the entire all of Kentucky. And what that looks like is our average caseload per investigator is about 260 cases. That's with more coming in daily. We average about 10 to 15 a week.
Terrence, can I stop you for a moment and ask you a question?
Sure.
With the decrease in your staff, what specific, where have they gone?
So we've had, when any of them have retired or left, we have been unable to fill that position because we can't show that we can afford it in the budget.
Okay.
And so we've also had staff reductions in numbers of allowed slots. And so we're not allowed to fill those anymore. We currently have an allotment of 22 employees and we're at 18, but we don't have the funding to fill any of those other ones. And then I'll get 2 slides from now. We'll kind of get there. This is just an overall picture of the org chart. The last time someone came and spoke to you all about what the office or what the agency looked like. And then if you look closely, as I shift to the next slide, those are all of the offices within the agency that have been eliminated because we have not been able to fund them. And so as our allotment has gone down, we have not been able to even advertise to hire for those positions, which in some cases has been full units. And then some of those don't even show the full scope of it because we still have enforcement officers or the investigators. We just don't have nearly as many, but we still have them. We just don't have 17. We have 3. So I say all that to say this. I'm very aware that state budgets are hard. It's very difficult to manage that for an entire state and to think of where money has to go and where it has to be cut. That's a very difficult decision to make. And I do want to point out, however, that continuous cuts have hurt our agency, especially hard. If we filled the remaining open positions at the minimum salaries allowed, that would be, which is really difficult to do, we would still be at 106,000 in a shortfall. And that excludes any proposed pay raises or payroll deferral amounts. And so that's, if we were able to fill those, we'd still be well over our budget, which again, I mentioned our federal funding that we do have that helps supplement some of this, but that is not a set amount. It's based on mostly the work that we've done in the year prior, and they pay us back for some of that work that we've done, which as of now, we're able to stay in operation, but it's not sustainable because those funds are no set amount, whereas our salaries and all of that are. So that leads us to some of our comprehensive and compounding issues. We have a large case backlog. I mentioned that we have about 260 cases per investigator. Some of them have very extended investigatory periods because as new ones come in, they have to address those. And so some of those are years old. I personally was working with some of these in our legal review that are 6 or 7 years old. We have plenty of cases where the complainant has passed away or the respondent has passed away and we're not able to do anything for that individual because there's no one to then charge or seek damages against. And the biggest challenge, I do think the people who are harmed and never able to have any redress is a large challenge. Another one of our larger challenges is a danger of our loss of federal funding. And every 2 years, HUD does an overall agency review. We just completed our agency review last week. And one of the concerns that's been from HUD, I wanted to highlight for you all, and they have restated to me that we are very much in danger of, at some point, not being able to get as much from them based on our inability to staff and to adequately resolve the cases in a timely manner. So this was one of the concerns and conclusions in our performance annual review from HUD, that, as a summary, says that as an agency processing over 50 housing cases a year, that we are not really able to meet those timelines that they require and that they feel are necessary. And so they said that the agency does not have the staff necessary to produce quality, timely complaint processing, and that those challenges will be discussed as part of their performance standards that they look for us to follow. So what I'm asking for, and again, sorry I can't be like Secretary Adams and ask for nothing, is just an increase in appropriation to meet at a minimum our staffing levels that are needed for our operations. Are ideally for us to be able to fund what we need to do. We would be around $2.8 million that needed to be appropriated. And then that, in conjunction with some of our federal funding, should keep us able to stay in operation. I am looking at other options for raising money, but we are limited under 344 in what we can and cannot do in terms of raising money and also in seeking money from individuals because of our prosecutorial nature. We have to do everything blindly, so we don't have any conflicts. There's also, I've done some legal research, and another thing that I would like to ask from the General Assembly, and this would be another conversation another day, is being able to join 24 other states whose human rights agencies are able to assess fines and fees and penalties for egregious actions or habitual offenders or that type of thing. And then two more things that I would ask here would be just looking at other ways to invest in the human rights agenda and ways to collaborate with the General Assembly on how we can address some of these issues, even within and outside of our office. And then also just working with us on allowing for flexibility for seeking other opportunities and raising money, maybe even having an appropriation for a grant writer to be able to then seek grants that could help cover some of that as one level of a solution, just to make sure we do have somebody who can at least be dedicated to helping us not have to ask you for much more. So those are some of the issues we're facing and some of the asks that I have of you. And so I would welcome any questions at this time.
Thank you for your presentation. Do you know what your current appropriation is?
So for 2022, we were at 2.1 roughly.
And how much do you think it would take? How much are you needing to be able to fill those positions?
So to fill the positions, ideally, with having our one research component office that we have not had for a while, that would be around 2.8. I think looking at what we're looking at in terms of cost, 2.5 or 2.6.
In addition to what you're currently receiving, correct?
Overall,
okay.
Yes, sir.
Got you right there.
And one of the another thing that we're looking at, I actually just had our responses back. We're looking at other office space to try to save money in that as well. The bid closed and none of the properties saved us any money, so we're looking at reopening that bid or going to a smaller office space to share offices. I'm speaking with the team at our all-staff meeting on Monday about that idea as well, just other ways to save money so we can effectively do what we're supposed to do.
Thank you, and I'll be happy to look this over. We have questions. First, Representative Miller.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome, Director Sullivan, and good job on your presentation. I would say that this is not, I don't think this is a new story, and I don't recall your background in state government, but of course, in the budget process this time of year, you all are submitting what you want to the governor's budget office, which typically is in November, I think. Mm-hmm. And then the governor puts together his budget, and then we review it during the session. To my knowledge, and I'm not on the budget committee, so some of these colleagues may correct me, but I think the General Assembly just gave the governor exactly what he wanted last time. So I would like to know if that's true, and but that's my understanding. I don't think we cut anything. So I think that your first step is you've got to more strenuously lobby the governor's budget office, because I mean, rather than specifically talking about case processing and case load, it's really justice you're after. Mm-hmm. And justice delayed is justice denied all too often. And it's backlog. It's what I recall from the last time I got involved in this topic was the backlog was just totally unacceptable. And I don't know that the governor's gotten really interested enough in the topic or excited enough in the topic to get involved. But I think you all really need to focus on the governor's office of budget in terms of pressing your case, because this is $2 million, $2.1 million is we spill that much on the way to the bank a lot of days. So this isn't a big deal budget wise. So if the governor includes it, then there's a good chance that you're going to get a lot of what you want. Maybe not all, but a lot of what you want. So I would encourage you to press that case and don't allow justice to be delayed or denied.
So if I can respond to that, two pieces. I'll start with the second half first. The backlog that was discussed the last time, I think our former chair spoke to it, was not as much. It was partly a budgetary issue, but it was more of an internal issue that has been resolved, and we have addressed the legal backlog. Those have been addressed. There were roughly 30 cases that were severely aged that we have since addressed. To your point on the process, I did speak to the governor's staff last year about this issue, and in the governor's proposed budget, he gave us an increase of $380,000, which was then removed in the legislative process.
Representative Bratcher.
Thank you. First off, I'm sorry I missed the roll call. I came in during Secretary of State presentation. Two questions. Number one, Mr. Sullivan, you say that you don't have the power to assess penalties. What is it that you do once you find that there has been a violation? And I have another question after that.
Okay, thank you. We don't have the power to assess individual fines and penalties. We are able to have judgments for the people we represent. And so if you were to file a complaint through our agency, we would be able to effectively move that through the legal process, and we could get a judgment for you, but we don't take any of that money for ourselves. We're not able to, outside of what we're doing on behalf of someone, we're not able to just impose a fine that goes for us. Other agencies are allowed to do that on top of whatever is found for a complainant, or they're able to do some type of share. But we don't, and I don't think that we should, we don't take money in the judgments or settlements from those individuals who have filed a case through us. We offer a free service for a reason, because it's the people who need us to offer that service. And if someone had the financial means to do it otherwise, they would hire a private attorney. And so we don't want to take from them. We want the ability to assess those different fines and fees. And we do have that ability in housing, but we don't have it for any of the other case types at the moment.
Okay, I get it. Second question, if I may, is do you have, is there a way to get, lack of better words, like a track record of how many you have solved, and like if you've dismissed, or if and what you did with each one, if you didn't dismiss, if you did find a judgment or whatnot? Is there somewhere online or whatnot in public access that you could find that out?
So all of our case determinations are, so we make our case determinations the third Thursday of every month in our commission meetings, and all of those are online on video, and also preserved in a book, a commission book that highlights a summary of every case that we receive and the disposition of that case. And so that can be requested and shared.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Graham.
Chairman, for those of you who are on this committee, just to give you a little history of Terrence. Terrence worked in the LRC office when he first got out of law school, I think. So he's familiar with the process because he's been here and worked in the process. The other thing is, Terrence, I want to ask you this. The investigations or the investigators of at the year 2008, you said you had how many?
2008.
And how much was the budget at that time?
So we had 17, and the budget was, or no, we had, at that point we had 13, and the budget was right under 2.5.
And so how much was it this past year? To just give me some idea of what was appropriated. How much was appropriated?
2.1.
2.1?
2.1 million. However, the difference is after some of the retirement contribution changes, we would nowhere be near able to afford that at this point. That's why in 2008, after 2008, the costs in payroll went up 900%.
Do you know what the average appropriation by other state legislatures are to the human rights commissions across the country? What's the average amount?
I don't know the average. I did when I first...
Well, what's the highest? Do you know the highest state and the lowest? And what that appropriation is?
I don't, but I can get that.
Well, I would be interested in terms of the population, what measures with Kentucky's population, primarily, because that would give us some idea as to, and if they're, how successful they are, and that appropriation amount. I think that would help in your discussions with members of the Budget Review Subcommittee, as well as with members of this, the House and the Senate.
I did look at, when I first started, I met with all of our contiguous agencies, and Missouri and Tennessee is really close in, or closer in size. Their appropriation is double, and they have multiple offices throughout the state they have departments, whereas we have 3 investigators doing all types. They have, in Chattanooga, they'll have their housing unit, and then in Nashville, they'll have employment.
So they have them split up across the state where people can make that travel. It's not all centered in one area.
So they have everyone in Nashville, but then they have the larger branches in different parts of Tennessee, because they saw that they were able to be a little bit more responsive in investigations and all of that if they were able to be around the state. But they did that after, or with extra appropriations. They were able to do that and open some offices later on down the road. And then Indiana is another comparable, that their appropriation is a little bit higher than ours, where they were around 3.5, but they also were able to fundraise, and they also, in some of their improvements, once they got that extra appropriation, they were also able to then get extra federal appropriations, because they were able to do more work to bring in more federal money. And so that's something that I hope to emulate here, is if we were able to get a higher appropriation, we can then investigate more quickly and then bring in more federal money on the back end to help cover some of that shortfall.
So what happens and this is my last question, Mr. Chairman. What happens, you said that the federal government's they've sent you a letter or at least advised you that they will be looking at the amount of appropriations that you will receive from the federal government at the end of this year, did you say? Or their fiscal year is a little bit different
Their
than
fiscal
ours.
year just ended.
Yeah.
We have every 2 years a performance review, and that's what just concluded at the end of their fiscal year. And so that was a note in their conclusion of our agency status. And I have biweekly meetings with our HUD manager. And the first question that she asks every Friday is, have you hired new investigators? That's their biggest concern, is they want us to have at minimum 2 more investigators and 1 more intake person to take those cases on the front end.
So the $2.8 million would help you do that? Are you telling us that? Or the amount of money that you said that you need?
That would help us do that, yes. In the short term, that would hire us. We could get 2 or 3 more investigators, and we currently only have 1 admin staff in the entire agency. And being able to have that, 1 or 2 of those would be able to help in some of that initial processing as well. We had 7, and then we had to either relocate some of them to where we only have 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Senator Nemes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your service, and thanks for looking at ways to make it happen. What are the ramifications of not being able to adhere to the legal guidelines? Are the cases dismissed, extended, or refiled? And another question is, does the lack of staff cause prioritizing of the cases, or is it first come, first served?
Those are 2 great questions, and thank you. Since you're newer, I don't believe we've been able to work together before, so nice to meet you. To the first question, the legal ramifications are, it's a difficult answer. By law, after that 180 days, there can be a petition to the court to force us to work faster. That is generally the recourse that people are offered. However, 1, it's harder to work faster if we're still stuck in an investigatory process where someone is making calls to Fulton when we're in Louisville and trying to figure out what's going on while they have 10 new cases come in from Pikeville. So that's a little more difficult. But we do have, that is the redress, is to say, hey, you need to work faster, and the court can ask us to. We have had a few cases more recently where the circuit court has thrown them out because we have not had after extensive delay. So that does happen. It's a little bit more, it's been happening more lately than it had in the past. And I think that's because of the consistent slow walking of some of these cases, and judges in those jurisdictions have seen us sitting before them for so long that at some point they rightfully so say enough's enough and ask for us, or they dismiss it. And then at that point, yes, someone would have to refile, but also at that point, the statute of limitations will have passed on their ability to file. And so in that situation, they could be left out.
And the other question on first come, first serve, is that the way you handle it?
So we handle the cases in it is first come, first serve. However, HUD has a very strict timeline for the processing of housing cases. And in order to stay compliant with our HUD contract, we do have to process those a little more quickly. So housing is the only area where we have a dedicated staff person for investigations to solely do housing cases, which takes away our ability for them to do other cases, which piles up the other types. But housing does have to move in. HUD has a 100-day policy, and so we are, in theory, held to keeping that under 100 days, or we have to show reasonings on why it's past that. And so those do have a type of preference, but we do first come, first serve, and we have
So you
staff
don't
doing
prioritize like a doctor would. A heart attack goes over a broken arm. So,
Correct.
okay. Can I have a follow-up question there, Mr. Chairman?
Briefly.
Would more time by statute help any or not? I know you need staff to help bring the cases along quicker, but would, for instance, even if you had staff, are the timelines too short to get the investigations done?
They are too short. I don't want them to be too long for people to still be without, but I do want to offer some type of protection and clarity on what the process looks like. There are people who will call me multiple times a day and say, it's day 181, what happened with my case? I know the law, and they will send me a lot of messages to that effect. There was a bill last session by Senator Westerfield to extend our deadlines. That did pass through the Senate, and then it didn't come up in the House. And so I do hope that that comes up again this coming year. But extended timelines are appreciated.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Koenig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Sullivan. Along the lines of what Senator Nemes just went, it sounds like you need changes to your statute on several levels, not just the extension of the deadline, but allowing you other methods of raising revenue, if it's grants or donations or whatever. Those seem like completely reasonable things. And, as you go forward, I don't know if, hiring someone to do grants is the best way to go when you can contract with someone and not incur all the additional costs of hiring somebody. But, I'll leave that up to you all. I think it would be helpful for this subcommittee to, if you could go back, and apparently you've been looking back all the way back to 2008 at just all the budgets over the years is reasonably far back as you can get, and then the caseload, because that seems to be the best metric for us to be able to measure how your staffing needs, so that next year we can use that as an understanding, so we know what your needs are. Who is not allowing you to advertise for positions?
So when we are seeking to fill a position, we also have to show that we can afford that position. And so then if we're not able to afford those positions, then we can't post them, as well as looking at our own budgets before we post a position to look at the retirement contribution and looking at all the other benefits that come. Trying to think, an investigator starts around 30,000, and then looking at all of the costs that go with that, it ends up being I think 98,000. And so having one, looking at all of that, we then see when we submit it for approval to hire or whatever, we can't show that we could sustain that position.
Okay. And I'll take this opportunity to say something I've said several times before, and you've set me up for it. We should be across all functions and all branches of government, letting someone know every year, and I know that, and I've been vocal in this year in saying we need to start giving raises to state employees. But I think every year it would benefit us to give every employee a letter saying, yes, your salary is 30,000, and then there's all this other stuff that we're paying for, so your actual cost is 98,000 or whatever it is, so that people understand that, I know you can't eat health insurance or life insurance or whatever, or it doesn't put a roof over your head, but for people to understand what the actual cost of employee is, I think would be beneficial. One last question, if I may, Mr. Chairman. The smoking, How many complaints do you get on that?
I haven't seen any in a while. I think that people know that you can't deny people their breaks or whatever, and that the cost. I haven't seen any in my time.
Okay.
And looking across the few years, I haven't seen any. And you're welcome for that setup, by the way.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I think it's time that maybe we get rid of that protected class in the state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative, which protective class are you speaking of? Senator Southworth.
Can we trade one? If we take one off, we add a new one.
Thank you for setting me up for my Senate Bill 98, adding a protected class bill last session that died. So I'll go ahead and throw that in there. I had a question. In fact, as we're talking, I've got 3 million questions coming. So I'm going to try to shorten this down to a couple of key ones and then maybe dig in further offline later. But you're talking about the HUD contract, and so I'm familiar with HUD contracts in context of KHC. And some contracts end up being, the admin fees or whatever that you get for providing the services through the HUD contract brings into the bottom line, and sometimes it really takes away from the bottom line. Is the HUD contract that you have and or whatever other federal contracts of other services that you provide, do those bring into your bottom line, or are they services that you're the agency that's the one that should do it because you have the resources and it actually costs us state funds to pull off?
So, and to your 3 million questions, that's why I put my email address up there. Happy to talk offline. Our HUD contracts and our EEOC contracts are literally and figuratively keeping the lights on. They pay us for, we have, our cases are dual filed. And so what that means is if someone files a case with us, we also would trigger a HUD case as well. And HUD then pays us for the steps along the way of doing our job. So we don't have any extra administrative fees or anything. It's all helpful to us because we have an agreed to pay schedule every year that we sign in the summer that says if you investigate a case to probable cause, you get X amount of dollars. If you have if there are court hearings or administrative hearings, you get X amount of dollars. And then we submit, after we complete that work, we go into our federal portal and just upload proof. And then we get money that builds up that then at the end of the year we can voucher for to go into our account, for which then we actually did a transfer last week to cover our lease payment. And so it's very helpful that we have those contracts and that we're able to honor those commitments to those agencies.
Senator, I don't mean to rush you, but we're getting short on time and we still have the LRC that we have to have. So if we can, we've got 2 more behind you to ask questions. And then
Sorry,
we'll
Jay.
move to this. No problem.
I will email you. How's that? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, very much. Representative Miller, did you have another question?
Just one quick question. I noticed the Fed HUD mentioned your board diversity. Or do you have any open board seats now?
We just had 3 reappointments a month ago, so we don't have any open.
Did those appointments address the federal concerns?
We don't have any concerns anymore. That was from the 2019 review.
Oh, okay.
And
all right.
so
No problem. Thank you.
The new one just finished.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Thomas.
Thank you, Chairman Dossett. And I want to go back to a question I have a question that you raised regarding your cases and the changes in the nature of your cases. But let me say by way of prefatory remarks that I have no problem talking about the issue of race when race matters.
Mm-hmm.
When it's germane to the subject, I have no problems talking about it. And what I frankly find offensive are those individuals who want to ignore or show disaffection to individuals who are oppressed, racial minorities who are oppressed because of their race. That's what I find entirely offensive. My question to you is this. You indicated that beginning in 2018, the composition of your case has changed, and where disabilities were the most the majority of your or the plurality of your cases, that's now changed to race. And you said that's from 2018 to 2021. I was wondering, why is that? Why is it in the last 3 years we've seen a shift now to racial discrimination being the bulk, or I say the number one or the top plurality of your cases?
Thank you, Senator. That's a good question, and that's one I don't, as I can't speak to the motivations of people, I don't know why that shift happened, but I can say from reviewing some of the incidents, it seems apparent that in many cases, people, especially in the workplace or in housing issues, have been a little bit more emboldened in how they express their hatred of communities. We had a lot of racial cases around Black people in the workplace. It really, in certain areas of our state, it really spiked 2 years ago, and then has continued to go up. And then in the past year, we also, in 2020, we also had a raise in cases against the AAPI community. And so I think looking at events, current events in that span of time from 2018 to 2021, and some of the things that were going on nationally, you could see it replicated in Kentucky, the groups that were targeted in our discrimination cases, and that manifested itself in a steep increase in racial hatred and the emboldenment of racial hatred. And I am with you. It very much upsets me, and having some of these conversations with the people who have filed complaints and some of the people in this process, some of the things that people have felt empowered to do lately is very difficult to see on a day-to-day basis. And I will also take this opportunity to share that I personally get letters to the office, very racially offensive letters, directed to me that will come to the office or to my house. And it's people who feel very, very empowered to say and do things that they really shouldn't. And it's only gone up, and I do wish that we could do more about that. And that's partly what I hope this office is able to do again, because when it was created, that was part of it, was being able to have that ability to educate people and to get people to come together. And we haven't had that opportunity, because if you go back a few slides, one of the green X's was the office that was supposed to help do that. And so we need to have the ability to make people, you can't make people change, but to at least get them to try to get them to listen.
Representative Wheatley, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try to be brief. I too could have many, many, many questions, and thank you, Director Sullivan, for being here. It's, I think, my first time having to address you, and this work is so incredibly important. It's a great pleasure to have you, but such a displeasure to hear some of the things that we're discussing here today. And as an attorney in Covington and having the office there and practicing employment law, I'm able to get some satisfaction for some of the referrals, and I believe it's John C.K. Fisher is still there. Good. And he does a great job, but it is discouraging to hear these numbers. But I'm going to go away from that conversation because you mentioned that there is some states around us who have, or some states in the United States that have up to 37 protected classes, and Kentucky has one of the most restrictive, and I think everybody in this room knows that. It's one of the reasons for the decline in the staffing and the decline in funding over the years, I believe, and it's very discouraging. So can you just talk about, even surrounding states, some of the other protected classes that we see the most?
Some of the protected classes, we did have sex and gender, and then LGBTQ status, which that's been addressed by the Supreme Court. So it's not, it'd still be great to add as a protected class, but it's not as prevalent, just because it is by executive order and by the Supreme Court included. Another one that I was asking about last year was income source in housing. A lot of states have income source in housing as a protected class. The city of Louisville just added income source in housing as a protected class. That one I think is very important, especially thinking of single parents who are trying to get an apartment and can't use non-W-2 wage income as a way to find somewhere to live, and thinking of a single parent who has a kid and they have child support, and it's for someone to say, oh no, you can't count your child support to add housing for your child as a source of income to be able to have housing for your child. That doesn't make sense to me. And so being able to expand into that, for example, is another thing that most states have done that we have not yet tackled. So those are some of them. I have a list at the office if you ever want to see of different ones that people have. And those are the more common ones just because they seem a little bit, they go a little bit more with the times of trying to understand where people are. And again, denying housing because it didn't come from a job that is, a W-2 wage job, just having someone have to be homeless because they couldn't count that $300 a month towards an income requirement just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I look forward to talking offline about this, and hopefully we can codify, even though it's been, some of the rights have been granted by the Supreme Court, that we can codify here in Kentucky and firm up those rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Director, very much. You've done an excellent presentation. I know you were urged to make sure to reach out to the governor's office as they put their budget together. Feel free to reach out to me in January.
Okay.
As we start crafting, looking at what the governor puts forward and what we will craft, and I will be happy to do what I can to advocate on your behalf.
Thank you, and thank you all for listening today.
Next, we have the Jay Hertz, Director of the Legislative Research Commission, and we'll ask him to come up here and introduce himself. Oh, before we begin, I do want to check if there are any members, as we did roll call, that are not here within the building or here in the committee room. If you'd like to let us know that you are present, you can go right ahead right now.
Kevin Bratcher.
Philip Pratt.
Thank you both. We've got you both there.
You want to tap from here and you can roll. Or you can use the arrow button.
Our new chairs are stuck underneath here. Give me a second.
Thank you very much, and please go right ahead and introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jay Hertz. I am the director of the Legislative Research Commission. I am here today at the direction of the Speaker and the Senate President. I have been discussing with them over the summer our staffing and compensation issues that the staff of the Legislative Research Commission are currently experiencing. Their directive was about 10 minutes. That's my plan. It's always, you never want to be the guy between you and the door, but this is an important topic. And I think I have some good information for you, and then we can take some questions. So I think it's always good to remind everybody what the mission, vision, and values for LRC nonpartisan staff are. And I am going to, although Senator Schickel is not in the room, I am going to listen to his good advice. I'm not going to read slides to you. So I will describe slides, or if there's something in particular I think you should take note of, I will do so. But we have chosen some staff areas to provide you some greater context of. This is just some information about if we were to take all LRC staff, what percentage of those staff do those represent? We tend to think of time in the General Assembly a little bit different than other people do. So what we've chosen to do is give you some information in 2-year House terms and 4-year Senate term contexts to give you sort of an idea of change over time in time frames that make sense to members of the General Assembly in your experience here. Green would mean good. Yellow would mean danger. Orange means dangerous. And red means we probably need to do something. So you all use constituent services. Those of you that are in the House, you will notice that we've had, just as an example, a 40% staff turnover in that staff section in the last 2 years. Move on to the next one. Obviously, the red there is the Judiciary Committee. In the last 2 years, we have had a complete staff turnover in the Judiciary Committee. Moving on to those same committees in a 4-year Senate term, we're starting to see some danger there with our staff economists who are very important to putting together the consensus forecasting group number that you will all use in order to do your budget. What is now legislative oversight and investigations. I'm old enough that it will always be program review to me, but I'm forcing myself to say legislative oversight and investigations. We're seeing significant turnover there. And then the ones that should get all of our attention, budget review, judiciary, and here's the one that will hit many of you squarely in the face. We've actually seen 110% turnover in LAs in the last 4 years. We're with this reality facing us, what are employees telling us? We do verbal and written exit interviews that I review virtually every one since I've been director. And since 2017, the top reasons given as they sever service is they have an ability to advance their career outside the agency. They're getting a pay increase to leave the agency, or family circumstances have dictated that they no longer work here. As I've seen those and thought about them, what are some challenges related to what staff is telling us? The hours of session versus the hours of interim create a real work-life balance issue that you are also well aware of. I know that Representative Graham has spoken recently on the reality for our budget review staff of having refrigerators in their offices and sleeping under their desks in order to make the short timelines that we're under to be able to produce what you need to vote on. Related to that, there's a perception that I would like to dispel that LRC staff work really hard during the session, but they've got it pretty easy during the interim. There may have been a time in the past before we had annual sessions that could have been the case. It is no longer the case. In virtually every metric that we use to keep track of what's going on, we are just as busy now, generally speaking, as we would be during a regular day of session. So you might have longer hours during the session, but the workload is not reducing. Many staff haven't received a pay increase since 2018. At the moment, one of the areas that we're competing with the executive branch with is teleworking. They are offering staff the ability to telework 3 days a week. What we do is not particularly conducive to teleworking, particularly during session. We are very good at training great staff for other employers. I'm not going to use any names, but I think that there is someone in the agency today who started out as a courier, moved on into LA world as a floor assistant, became an LA, is doing a great job, and they have been offered a job outside the agency at a greater rate of pay. So, that is a reality that we are dealing with. I will also note, and I don't want to be mischaracterized as a challenge. I just think it is a reality that we also have to deal with, is that the nonpartisan requirements that we place on nonpartisan staff, it requires a special person who every day is willing to leave their own personal inclinations and opinions in their car, come in, service every member appropriately and without regard to party or where they are on the ideological spectrum, and do that every day, and also know that their name will never appear in the lane report. They will never be recognized for the great work they do publicly. We do have internal ability to recognize high performers in a public way, but that's an internal communication. Their name will never be in the lane report. With all that said, it's always dangerous for someone like me to recognize one staff section and not another staff section. But as we reflect on these turnover numbers, I do think that I need to recognize our human resources staff. When you have the amount of turnover that we're experiencing, the amount of work that it takes to offboard someone and then post their job, arrange for interviews, make sure the interview process is going, and then make offers and then onboard them. They have been very busy. And our ability to continue to function at a high level, even in the face of this, is an astounding thing to me. You may ask, well, what about compensation? So it's not, at this point, it's not just that we are not competitive in the marketplace. We're not even competitive with ourselves. If we look at where we were in 2011 and what we're doing now, we were paying more in 2011. than what we're paying now. So that leads me to a short conversation about what are next steps, what are we doing to help you prepare for the next legislative branch budget. I've spoken publicly about the market analysis we're currently doing. We are benchmarking our jobs and what we're paying folks against appropriate jobs in the private sector, so that we're able to make sure that we're being competitive. Coupled along with that is we are in the throes of putting together a new personnel plan that should provide pathways for folks to be able to advance their careers. So folks will be able to start out as a level 1, understand what it takes to move to a level 2. When they move to a level 2, there would be a compensation increase associated with that. So we're providing pathways for folks to be able to progress through their careers here. Related to that, as part of our process of preparing for the next budget cycle, we've identified a pool of money that would have been used for staff compensation that has gone unused. I'm going to be asking the Speaker and Senate President to authorize me to do a 1% pay increase for LRC staff before the end of the calendar year. This would be much like what AOC did earlier this summer. What I'd like to leave you with, and Representative Koenig, I thought I was going to be the only person today who mentioned the Kentucky Personnel Cabinet's annual report. So thank you for not having me be alone in that. When you work here as long as I have, there are things you look at that most normal human beings don't. And one of those is the annual report put out by the Kentucky Personnel Cabinet. And this is from page 5. If you go to page 4 in that report, it will tell you that what the median state employee compensation is, and then it loads in all of the other things related to that compensation, and then gives you the total cost for that employee. So it exists, and it gets distributed every year. Though longtime observers of the Legislative Research Commission will wonder where this 529 number comes from. We usually have closer to 350 full-time employees. I don't know where they pulled this number from, but to paraphrase Greg Harkenreiter, I don't know if these are the right beans, but these are the beans we have, so let's count these beans. What I want to leave you with is all three of these entities have a statewide mission. And in fact, the Legislative Research Commission also has a regional and national mission. From our involvement in the Southern Legislative Conference, Council for State Governments, we are already actively preparing for the National Conference for State Legislatures to come to Louisville in 2024. It's my understanding that conference is the largest conference the Louisville Convention Bureau has scheduled during that time frame. So it's a big deal for Kentucky. It's a big deal for Louisville. It's also going to be a big deal for us as we try to work with NCSL to make sure that that's a success. But what I wanted to highlight here was if you were the governor or the secretary of a cabinet and there was a problem you wanted to solve or you needed more information on a policy question, you potentially have thousands of people available to you, either economists, policy analysts, subject matter experts that would be feeding you that information so that you can make decisions. If you work in the administrative office of the courts, you have potentially hundreds of people that would be available to you to be able to provide you that sort of information. You have us, and there's a lot less of us than there are of them. And this graph, I think, also illustrates why it's important that that we do have nonpartisan staff supplying you with information. No one here is going to shade information in a particular way to benefit them or to protect someone. If you're a member of the General Assembly and you ask a question, you're going to get the exact same information as another member of the General Assembly who has asked that question. And I think that is really important as you move forward to be able to engage on policy issues, that all of you have access to the exact same best information that we can provide you. I'd also point out that during the last year and a half, this agency never shut down. We were always here. And I'm really proud that there were long stretches in the recent past where the only place that you could call and talk to a live human being in state government was the Legislative Research Commission. And related to the small number of people that we have working here, embedded into that is the necessity for flexibility. And there are times where what you thought you were going to do that day was not at all what you ended up doing that day. And there were, I see people chuckling. There were days last year that I was on the phone all day talking to people about unemployment insurance issues, as we did what we could to be able to make sure that if they were referred to us by a member of the General Assembly, that they got to talk to someone, and then we passed that information along as directed by the governor's office to try to get them some help. I will end, and I'd be happy to take your questions, that I think the Commonwealth gets a lot of benefit and value from the small number of people that work for the Legislative Research Commission. And if you look at the statutes that create my position and control what I'm supposed to do, part of that is I'm supposed to make sure that you have really good people working for you so that you can represent your districts, your constituents, and whatever policy issues you care to pursue, that you have the folks that make sure that you're able to do that in an effective sort of way. So that's why I'm here today, to let you know what some of the challenges are, and as we move through the budget process, we will be providing you with some plans and budget numbers related to implementing those plans. So when you make some final decisions about compensation issues in a global sort of way, you'll be able to understand what it is we're seeing and what our suggestions are. So once again, thank you for your time, and I have now lived up to my responsibilities to my bosses, and I look forward to any questions that you have.
Representative Graham.
I just have a comment, and I guess because I'm here a lot and I live here, the staff that we have, they're outstanding. And as many of you know, when we go to our regional meetings and our national meetings, our staff on a number of occasions have been recognized as being one of the best legislative staffing in the country. They've won numerous awards. I was shocked the night that I walked in, or that morning I walked in, and people in the budget office were getting themselves together, wrapping up their sleeping comforts, and preparing to work through the rest of the day for the following day. Some went home to take a shower, but it was like a 30-minute jump in, jump out back. And so I do appreciate the director coming before us and letting us know as a body of what is going on and why we are losing staff members. And when you lose those staff members, you're losing the institution of knowledge and experience. And so I think we hope we can address this as we move forward in coming up with a budget for next fiscal year, because all of us who are sitting here, we're here because, number one, when we have constituents who have problems and they call our office, it's those LAs who are working hard to get those problems resolved. And they are relying on those who are in constituent services or people who are in the different areas of LRC to find out what the problem is, to correct the problem, and to serve our constituents. And so, once again, thank you. I have a few questions, but I'm going to hold off. I just wanted to make that note, and I wanted to say to the director, I'm glad you did this today. Thank you.
Representative Tate.
J2, I would like to thank you for the on the behalf of the LAs and all the LRC. You know, just as Representative Graham said, so frequently I've come in and my LA has been taking calls for me. And so just as we talked about in the previous presentation, sometimes those calls aren't always so nice. And so I appreciate that staff being the buffer for us when those calls are not so nice. So I just wanted to make sure that I express my appreciation publicly. Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Thomas.
Jay, I want to join this course as well, and first say that you do an excellent job. You know, let me compliment you for your leadership at RRC. You know, every time I see you walking the halls, you're always present. So let me give a tip of the hat to you because you do an excellent job, and also my staff. I mean, I tell everyone I have a great staff, and so in terms of your hiring of good people. I want to applaud you for that. I do have, I guess, one large overarching question from your presentation. There were three areas in red where you have a lot of turnover. One is Judiciary Committee, which I find alarming because I think of the Judiciary Committee as probably being the second most important committee that we have here in the legislature after A&R. And to have that kind of turnover in that critical committee in our legislature is really alarming. Secondly, your budget review analysis. I mean, the budget really goes to how we fund and operate state government. So that's a really troubling issue as well. And then I serve on the Legislative and Legislative Oversight Investigations Committee, and that has a 100% turnover as well. So my question to you is, how are you going to address and correct those areas of concern? Because to me, they've got to be corrected. You can't have a Judiciary Committee or Legislative Oversight Investigation Committee or budget analysis that every 2 to 4 years, people are gone, because as Representative Graham say it quite well, you have that kind of institutional knowledge and experience in order to be able to function at a high level.
So, thank you for the question. I will say that it's easy to look good when you have a lot of competent people working for you. So I will take your praise and compliment, not just for myself, but for all the great people that work here.
It's meant sincerely.
Thank you. So the easy answer to your question is, well, let's just pay them more. And I don't think I think that's an important part of this of the answer. but I don't think it's the only answer. We are currently in the midst of a teleworking pilot project, and so there are staff in the commission who are currently authorized to telework 1 day a week, and so far I think that has gone pretty well. But that's an indication of within the constraints that we find ourselves due to the nature of our work, what is it that we can do to continue to build in flexibility for staff people during the interim? I know from my own personal experience that members make sacrifices from their time and families to be here, but LRC staff do the exact same thing. I've missed soccer games. Luckily, I haven't had to miss any dance recitals, but it's been a couple of times. I've had to cut short a family vacation so I could return here to be able to meet my responsibilities as an employee. And I know that virtually everyone who has worked here for any period of time has experienced that same thing. So I wish I had a better answer to you for this, but I think a large part of the answer is our continued ability to have the flexibility to be able to figure out what works for us so that staff feel like they can take time off. They can work remotely when appropriate, so that your needs and your constituent needs are being met, but they can also have more control over their lives when we're not in session. Because just like you, none of us have control over our lives during session. And the kind of person who's willing to make that sort of commitment to a place like this is, I think, really special. And I'm always impressed by the kinds of people who are willing to work here and lend their time and talents to help you be successful.
Senator Southworth.
Thank you. I want to zoom out a little bit because as I'm listening to you talk about staffing, it reminds me of what we did with poll workers and dividing their days in half. And I'm just thinking, do we have enough staff? Are we needing to divide their time? It draws me out to the bigger question of part-time versus full-time legislature. And then can you get around those issues with staffing solutions and whatnot? And all of this has been a grand debate, and I just am throwing it around in my head. But I want to know, from your perspective as a director, are you looking at what is the larger picture that you're looking at or seeing? And could you give us any insight on some of these big question decisions that we've discussed on the edges? If there's anything that we could maybe consider as far as obviously potentially changes to the law in that regard.
So I'll ask you a question so I can understand the question that you're asking me, or I'll make a statement and you could tell me if I'm headed in the right direction. You are a part-time legislature, but we continue to operate during the interim. The part of the interesting question that we have to answer when it comes to staffing and scheduling is we know what day you're going to be here for interim meeting. Oftentimes we don't know when you're going to pop in the afternoon because you happen to be in the area and you have a bill draft that you want to go over, and we didn't know you were going to get here till you get here, and that's fine. We are here to accommodate your schedules and your needs. We're not here to make our lives easier. what does the interim schedule look like? Is I know that some members think that we should maybe have 1 week of the interim, and then I can plan the rest of my week not being here. Or there's some members that prefer to see the meetings spread out more, so that they're so when they're here, their time isn't quite as compressed, and that allows them to do other things. And I think we've reached sort of an intermediate place there where there's generally speaking, there's a week that there aren't any interim joint committee meetings. To accommodate your schedules, we try to have as few meetings on Mondays and Fridays as possible. I'm looking at a particular person. There are some people who the drive for a Monday meeting imperils their ability to be with their families on Sundays. Same thing with people who have long drives on Fridays. Late Friday afternoon meetings are not an optimal thing for many members. Other people, it doesn't quite matter when the meeting is because they can probably make it. So to the extent that things are more predictable, that certainly makes it easier to figure out staffing decisions. But the inherent flexibility we need to be able to make sure that the person you need to talk to is here when you need them does put some constraints on us. If someone's working from home that day, a bill drafter is working from home, and you need to talk to them, can you do it by phone? Can you do it by Zoom? That suits some members fine. Other members prefer in-face meetings. There are some instances where being in a room appropriately spaced to actually look at something together and talk it over is the best option for everyone. So I think that's a rambling way of answering. Predictability is helpful, but we never know when the thing is going to come that we all need to drop what we're doing and go do something different. Is that pretty close?
Thank you. There's 100 million hours we could put onto this topic, so I won't say that that answers everything, but there's no way to answer everything. So thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Jay, for my part, for the length of time I've been here serving in Frankfort, we have amazing individuals that work here for LRC that it's not a typical workforce that would be at any industry or any business like that, because you're dealing. Look at the individuals that they're having to deal with us as elected officials. Some of us are demanding. Some of us are able to work with those people that work here, whether they be our LAs or our staff. We're very blessed. We want to do everything we can to keep them. We know that sometimes, hey, they're in a training ground right here that's going to lead them to even greater lives than what they thought when they started. I think the most important thing for us to do is tell them how much we appreciate each and every individual that works in here. And as you said, we put a bump in pay. That will be beneficial, but is it enough? We won't know. But as myself, I have gone through. I'm on my 5th LA since I've been in office when I came here in 2007, and it's always amazed me how I survived losing each one of them. But they are dedicated to us and do the things we ask, and on top of it, they're having they're living their lives at home, knowing that we're living our lives at home and what issues they have with their children, their families, but they always end up putting us first. And I've always said, it's the staff here that keeps me in office being reelected because of how much they do. And reaching out, as you mentioned last year, they were the only live contact people who were having issues with unemployment. They were the only live voice that those people could speak to. And that just eased those people at home who were worried to death about how were they going to be able to provide food, put food on the table. So we're very blessed to have those men and women that we work with here, because I don't know how they put up with me or any of the rest of the elected officials, but they do, and they do it with a smile on their face. So we say thank you to them.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, we don't have a date for November the 16th will be our next meeting. Do watch our emails, and can I get a motion to adjourn? Moved in second. Thank you. Hey, Derek. I apologize. Whenever Jim was but I knew if no. I didn't want to.